House be even more worried about these in some sense than the Mueller investigation? Because I've heard that opinion stated.
Yeah, possibly. It's hard to know what Trump is thinking exactly, but from all the reporting that we've done and others, he's very worried about these investigations that can be so much more specific, and they end up being much more public. You know, the thing about the Mueller investigation is he is tight-lipped, and we get little hints here and there when there's a filing in court, but the House investigations can be much more public and air a lot more dirty linen. I'm not so sure about the tax returns, given that it was always a traditional component of any campaign for the candidates to release their tax returns. It's hard to see how far Trump's people can resist, but, you know, again, legally, they probably do have a leg to stand on. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But yes, I think the president probably is a lot more concerned, and he knows that the Democrats are out for a certain pound of flesh. So I think that he is probably quite worried about them.
And when you say that they're out for a pound of flesh, he acknowledges, we use the word like witch hunt and that sort of thing. We use that right down the line. And he's talked about this being an extension of the witch hunt. And the other term that is getting lots of play from the president in person and on Twitter is presidential harassment.
Right.
Is this, in fact, presidential harassment, or do you think it's oversight? It's oversight.
It's oversight. Now, will it be particularly enthusiastic oversight? Perhaps. But yes, even in his State of the Union, he referred to the harassment, and he even suggested there can't be peace and prosperity if he's under investigation, which is an interesting connection. So yes, he's seeing this as harassment, but I think normally this would be seen as oversight if, you know, indeed an enthusiastic, aggressive oversight, but yes, oversight.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with more Issues in the News.
Issues in the News is coming to you on the Voice of America in Washington. Did you know you can download our program? It's free on iTunes. Just click on the iTunes tab on our website at voanews.com. While you're there, go ahead and check out our other programs, Press Conference USA and Encounter. Also, visit us on Facebook and leave a comment or two. Then like us at Current Affairs with Carol Castiel. Now, back to our panel. Steve Goldstein for Market Watch and Tracy Wilkinson for Los Angeles Times. Our moderator is Washington journalist Michael Williams.
Welcome back. Following the U.S. lead, Russia announced it was withdrawing from the INF treaty, also announcing that it was beginning development of new medium-range missile systems. This, to me, was completely predictable, in a word. Steve, we'll start with a quick description of the INF, what it means, and what both sides have just pulled back from.
Well, they both had an agreement to not pursue this sort of weaponry that now both sides are eagerly going to develop.
These are medium-range
missiles.
And this is an agreement that dates back to Reagan, to the 80s. I believe it was Reagan and Gorbachev who originally signed this.
And I think this really plays into the Trump White House belief against every kind of multilateral and bilateral agreement. They don't want to be bound by any of them. They don't like the World Trade Organization. They don't really like the United Nations. They don't really, they didn't like NAFTA and created an agreement that ended up being pretty similar to it, but with a different name. But in general, they're very resistant to any kind of international check on their activities, really on anything. And I think that's really the broader context from leaving the INF. But there are, legitimate issues surrounding it. And I've also heard the suggestion that leaving the INF gives the U.S. more of a capability really against China, even though China's not a signatory, than it is Russia.
Tracy, was there any chance that withdrawal from this agreement by the United States would lead to compliance by Russia? I'm at a loss to see the strategy here. And how does withdrawal from this lead to anything else other than withdrawal and escalation by Russia?
The stated goal was maybe we can get the Russians to come back and negotiate, but I don't think anyone was holding out much hope for that. The United States contends that Russia has been violating this agreement for years, way back into the Obama administration. And so that you would suddenly pull out and and expect Russia to come around, I don't think was very realistic. In addition to what Steve said, Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, is particularly disdainful of arms control agreements, in addition to anything multilateral, because he feels like it ties the United States' hands in terms of what they can develop.
I think you hit on a key point when we were talking about foreign policy in the Trump administration. He came into this administration having virtually no policy opinions of his own. And so those are all driven by someone, and it's a matter of identifying who that person might be. And I think in this case, you've hit on it in John Bolton. This has his fingerprints clearly on it. My question with my limited Latin, I always like to ask, cui bono? Who benefits from this? Steve, from all of this, the withdrawal by both sides, who benefits? Who stands to gain? Because you have a very nervous Europe at this point, looking at two superpowers essentially rearming themselves.
I think, well, first, who benefits are defense contractors here in Washington who are well represented in the White House. But more pertinently, on a geographic or geopolitical thing, I think actually this should be seen less about a U.S.-Russia conflict. I do think Russia's neighbors should feel quite nervous about what's happening. So in some ways, withdrawal of this treaty is, again, I think it's about the U.S. facing China, and it gives Russia scope really to intimidate some of its neighbors as well. In terms of who benefit and who loses, you look at all of Russia's conflicts, both in the Middle East and with some of the former Soviet republics, as well as into Western Europe, where, they're playing an increasing role in politics there. Italy has sort of turned to Russia's side now. And then obviously in Eastern Europe, where their proclivity for action is well documented. So I think that's in terms of the winners and losers. It's really Europe and the Middle East are the losers here. And for the U.S., this is, again, I think they're looking east.
And especially in the context of the United States or the Trump administration being less than enthusiastic about NATO and its participation and its willingness to protect other countries, which is one of the founding principles of NATO. I think the Europeans are especially worried about all of this. And
my great desire is again to go back to Helsinki and to be inside that room where we had the president and Vladimir Putin together alone, and know what was agreed on that we don't know about. What happened, in that room, and is it possible that this is something that was discussed unilaterally between these two, or bilaterally between just these two individuals, and has led to this point? I'm just fascinated by the fact that as much as we know, there's certainly much more that we don't know about what preceded this, and the fact that, like many Trump foreign policy initiatives, none of the important partners in this, either internally or externally, were notified before it happened. Last word on this one, Steve. Do you think that there is any plan, or have you heard of any plan that's being developed to actually bring forward another type of treaty agreement, or is it just to use the Wild West now? Yeah,
I think Wild West is, hopefully not what happens, but I do think that, again, this is pulling back and being unconstrained. The reason, actually, I don't think maybe the Helsinki meeting was necessarily about this. Again, we mentioned John Bolton, who was not a party to that meeting. And it does, the president has this kind of wild group of Republicans with sort of different views, and right now Bolton's, I would say, on the defense side is in the ascendant, and so that may be the more direct link to what happened, rather than Putin himself whispering in Trump's ear. Not to say that he didn't. I'm not sure that this is the issue that he did it on.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Let's move on finally to our UN report on North Korea. The UN report stated that North Korea was taking definitive steps to ensure that its nuclear weapons could not be destroyed by quote-unquote military strikes, unspecified. A seeming contradiction, actually, to the air quotes tremendous progress that President Trump stated that had been made with North Korea in advance of the scheduled talks at the end of February, I believe.
Yes.
Tracy, I'll go to you, the specifics here.
Yes, well, the context, as you mentioned, is the summit that is coming up between Trump and Kim Jong-un on the 27th of February in Vietnam, which was announced in the State of the Union, which Trump announced in the State of the Union address. So that's the context. And yes, this UN report is said two things, basically, that one, the North Koreans are moving their weaponry and their infrastructure around to protect it from any kind of airstrike. And two, they continue to violate the sanctions and get around the sanctions in various ways, ship-to-ship fuel transfers and all sorts of illicit measures like that rendered, according to the UN, the sanctions ineffective, useless. And so it is a slap in the face to any kind of tremendous progress that Trump has claimed, in